This is the Big Swing Podcast, the home of inspiring, behind-the-scenes business stories from the world's leading content creators. My name's Sam Barcroft. I started my media company back in 2003 from my bedroom in Tottenham, and 16 years later, I sold it and I settled in for my happy ever after, helping out other entrepreneurs to scale their businesses. I've founded Creativille to share my insights with you, so subscribe to my newsletter at creativille.co and join me each week on the Big Swing Podcast as I chat with a super producer to explore the 3 most important decisions they've made in their quest for success. And stick around for the end when I'll let you in on my personal top takeaways from today's very special guest. Welcome to the Big Swing. Some entrepreneurs discover their talents later in life, and some, well, they're just born into it. Today's guest, the original gangster of viral videos, is definitely the latter. While the rest of us would get into trouble for not eating our veg, Jonathan Skogmo was reprimanded for illegally syndicating his newspaper round at just 10 years of age. And for Jonathan, starting businesses turned into a habit. The one that gained him fame in Medialand and a profile in the New York Times was Jukin Media, the viral video powerhouse that figured out how to easily pay people for their home videos and then license the user-generated content for brands. From Wired magazine to the Wall Street Journal, Disney, CBS, Paramount, pretty much any media brand you care to mention have featured Jukin videos. And the huge video brands Fail Army, People Are Awesome and Pet Collective are all Jukin channels, which together have garnered over 200 million fans and over 110 billion lifetime views. Pioneer doesn't almost feel like a big enough word for what Jonathan has achieved in an industry which didn't even exist before he founded Jukin back in 2009. But before he'd found his path, Jonathan was just a young kid out of film school in Chicago who thought that Hollywood was the best place for his talents to shine.
What I identified really early on was that I had this great ability, I think, to spot talent and spot people that are very talented in the craft, whether you're a writer, an editor, or director. And that's what a good producer is. And a good producer is just kind of like a businessman at the end of the day, right? They're just putting the pieces together and they're hiring really great people around them. So again, those areas kind of really complemented well. And I kind of went down that lane. And so when I first moved out to LA, I mean, this is also a typical LA Hollywood story. Well, I didn't know a single person. It was like I spent my last, I think, $100 at a screenwriting seminar, a big screenwriting seminar that was in town. And I was very close to living in my car at one point. After trying to reach out to so many entertainment people, any connection I knew, I couldn't get a job in entertainment, even with the alumni film school. And I actually worked on some pretty big films in Chicago before I moved out, but I really couldn't find a job. So one of my first jobs in LA was just being like a desk clerk, bellman at a hotel.
Wow.
And I was just checking people in. But I remember I had a hard time getting a job as a waiter, even as a valet driver, too. That was even tough. So
that must have been a real kind of shock when you got to LA, knowing that you had the business skills to hit that moment where you couldn't even get a job as a waiter. That must have been pretty tough.
Well, as you know, it's a cutthroat industry, and LA is super cutthroat. And sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. And right. I definitely learned that on later in life is, one job led to another. And my first job in production was a woman named Sandy Spreckman, who was an executive producer. She created the show Judge Judy, which is a pretty huge show. She was in between jobs. And I think she took pity on me, also a fellow Chicago, and she offered me to do manual labor around the house. And I was happy to do it because I just wanted to meet new people and do something different. And then I was like cleaning garages and doing yard work. But she was really great to me to give me an opportunity. And she actually found me my first job on a clip show. Right. I didn't know what a clip show was.
But that's amazing, John, when you think about that journey, right? So you've left Chicago with this big idea about making it in Hollywood, and you've got there, it hasn't worked out how you planned. So you're having to do pretty much anything to survive in order to stay in LA and get that dream to happen, to the point where you're nearly sleeping in your car. How did you feel about that at the time?
I think obviously it was scary and there's a lot of fear in me, but knowing that this job could lead to something, because even that checking people in. I was checking these really wealthy people into this hotel. I always thought it was an opportunity. Even when I was doing the yard work, I thought it was an opportunity, a stepping stone into something else. So
Right.
certainly it was scary, but at the same time, I think coming out to Hollywood and being young, like this is a dream. This is the media capital of the world. And I really believe the American dream still happens in Hollywood.
And so did you kind of give yourself a deadline when you were going through all those jobs? Were you like, I'm going to just keep going for 6 months more?
I think the rule is, someone once told me in Hollywood, we're all transplants from somewhere else. We're all trying for this dream. And it's really easy to give up. It's really easy to get discouraged. But I said, give it 2 years. Give it 2 years, which is relatively a short period of time. But when you're in this kind of slog of barely making it and just surviving, it could be quite a long time. And those first 6 months in LA were pretty tough.
And so you show up to work on your first Hollywood production, and what did you find when you got there?
Well, it wasn't as magical as I thought it was. It was an old production office in Hollywood. But at the same time, I thought it was really cool to work on Sunset Boulevard in this old rusty production office with these kind of scrappy producers that also happen to be from Chicago. And it was a really kind of a hazing. It was hazing from executive producers, whether it was name calling or making me feel bad for whatever reason. But it also really toughened me up in a lot of ways, knowing that this industry is really tough. And so when the end of that 10 weeks was up, just so happens I was driving the executive producer home from a recording session, a VO session. And for whatever reason, we just got talking like normal people. And lucky for me, he just like really took a liking to me and ended up being a mentor to me. And I was supposed to leave after 10 weeks, but the show got picked up. I ended up being at this company for nearly 3 years and worked my way up pretty quickly within the organization.
It's a horrible thought that a young person with great ambition finds themselves in a situation where they feel they're getting hazed. Did you manage to find positives out of that experience? And when you were then running your own team of hundreds of people later on in your career, did you take anything from that experience?
So I think I was always luckily that I was always positive and optimistic. And even though it felt like a hazing at first, and it got better over time, but it was also realizing that this is cutthroat. This is dog eat dog. You're working with a bunch of freelancers. And I realized this also when I started freelance producing to a handful of production companies. People are out for your job in some way. And this is not in all cases, but I think in some cases, especially with me. But luckily, I was always optimistic and always staying positive, and just excited about the job. And I never, I think, lost that. I never lost who I was. And I think I applied that later on when I started my company, that I learned that there's a lot of shitty production companies and a lot of bad culture and a lot of bad morale. And I would never want to repeat those mistakes.
In the face of adversity, Jonathan's positivity and optimism saved him. His job was to sort through the VHS tapes that got sent into a PO box address, select the ones which were any good, and then track down the owners and get a license to use the footage on TV. It was slow, repetitive, and cumbersome. In short, it was ripe for disruption. Jonathan was an early adopter of YouTube and realised that he could do the same research job as a freelancer for several companies at once and earn much more money. And this new perspective on the industry sowed the seeds for Jonathan's first big swing.
I was freelancing, jumping from show to show and realizing that like one of the biggest production companies in Hollywood still in reality shows, non-scripted shows, we were working out of a dental office, like an office building. It was like weird. It wasn't like the Hollywood that I dreamed of, and the culture wasn't good. And so I think part of the reason I wanted to create a company was also make it fun for my employees and build a strong culture and build like dominance in a certain industry. And I thought there was a lot of opportunity. To me, it was a no-brainer. I'm just going to start this on the side. After going to MIPCOM.
MIPCOM being the big trade show in Cannes in France, where all the TV distributors and TV executives from networks come together to buy and sell shows and footage.
Biggest TV conference in the world, yes. So I go there, and first time me leaving the country. I know that's pathetic, but I'm fairly young. I'm 27 at the time. I go to this show, and I'm just amazed, this conference, because there's so many people there. The market is so big. the US is obviously the dominant market, but it's also small compared to the rest of the world. I'm seeing people drink rosé and people in suits, and I'm seeing these big tentpole shows being sold overseas in different territories. But then I saw the show that I helped produce being sold. And I put my blood, sweat, and tears in the show, and I realized that the producer I worked for owned the rights. And I felt kind of upset that, like, this guy's selling the rights to different territories. So what that show showed me was we can own the IP. That is the golden ticket. And so owning a show is really hard to do. Owning a format is really hard to do, as you know, in our business. Unless you originally create it or unless you fund it yourself, it's almost impossible. So I see the show being sold to all these different territories overseas. This guy's making all the money. And so I literally came back and kind of lost interest in the clip show world of just being a freelance producer. But I also saw people my age that were twice my age, and they were freaking miserable kind of doing this. John, I don't know if it was the companies or the industry itself. So I thought, if I can't own a show, a format, or a show, I can own those individual clips that make up a show. Right. And that's my ticket. That's owning that individual IP. I was already in LA for 6 years or so at this time. So it wasn't much stakes on the table. I was renting. I was in a nice apartment, but I wanted more. And I realized I could always go back to valeting cars or checking people in or move back to Chicago. So I think I quit in June of 2009. And then I said, you know what? I've been working my ass off the last 5 years. I'm just going to sell these clips. So I started licensing these clips out, and fall came. I thought I was going to go back and get a job. But then I started building this library of clips. Well, of course, then the year comes, I'm like, I'm actually getting some success. And so I kind of had all these micro proof points and started bringing revenue in, didn't raise any money. I probably spent $5,000 of my own money on some contracts and buying some videos at first, maybe $10,000. I'd love to say it came out with this big vision to create a 300-person global media company. I wish I could say that was the case, but it was almost like, let's try these little stepping stones.
I think there's a misconception out there that every entrepreneur goes out, raises $100 million, it gets 7 offices in 8 different countries, and then kind of smashes it out of the park. But I started my business working as a freelance photographer and just earning money however I could, whatever day of the week it was, whatever time of night it was. I mean, that's remarkable that you started Jukin Media on the back of maybe $5,000 of your own money and just hustling. That's an incredible thing to think that within less than 15 years, you were running a business with 200 plus employees, right?
Yeah, close to 300 when we sold. And so I think when the new year came, 2010, I was like, okay, maybe I could do a real business here. And
amazing.
So I think I really incorporated around then, and just started saying, okay, let's actually try this out now. Let's start hiring people. Let's turn this into like a side hustle into a business.
I suppose your swing was going from being just you to being responsible for other people's bills, paying their mortgages for their families. How did that feel?
I was lucky to be leveraging the young age I had and the young network I had. So I was hiring people kind of my age or younger to come in at minimum wage. And my roommate moved out, and I turned his room into an office. I had 2 people there. Then I put 2 people in my living room, and then in my room was my office. And it became this very kind of communal, scrappy as you can get kind of atmosphere. And I remember going to the supermarket and stealing plastic forks and silverware so we could all eat together and have enough silverware for the rest of the week.
Oh my God.
Service. So it was like a scrappy but fun communal operation. Like, I love those early days of like folding tables, rental computers, folding chairs. It was just like, it was great. So luckily I kept my costs really low. And I think that's so important in any business. Again, if I raised a whole bunch of money, just paid these people salaries, I would have ran out of money and I would have diluted myself and I would have to raise more money. So, within the year, I was the #1 company to go to that was licensing content. And then I think by the end of 2010, I got an office, my first office in Hollywood.
Jonathan had managed to successfully disrupt the supply chain of clip shows, but it didn't take long to realize that hosting the videos he found on his own YouTube and social media channels could provide a separate additional revenue stream, especially when YouTube offered to share the advertising revenue with channel owners.
I realized I'm starting getting a lot of views on some of these videos, even though it was more of a B2B business. And I thought, okay, I've always wanted to go back into creating shows. So I thought maybe this might be my first step into also being a publisher itself. After seeing these videos going viral, they didn't mean to go viral. I was having no metadata, no titles. But there was just like really great content that was going on this B2B page. And I thought, why don't I create a consumer page, a B2C page? And so that original page was called Jukin Video. And Jukin means another Chicago term to keep my Chicago roots. And Jukin means something lively, entertaining. Hey, is this party Jukin? Is this restaurant Jukin? Is it lively? A Chicago term. And then we started the pet channel. We started a sports channel. We started verticalizing the library because we had all this content, and then we realized we could start making money on YouTube.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to me because you did that so early. So YouTube is in effect doing 3 jobs for you. Number 1 is giving you videos to discover that you can then go and acquire. Number 2, it's acting as a shop window for your B2B folks who want to come find videos because you can then represent them. And number 3, you're publishing videos to your various pages for folks that like sport or folks that like pets, and you're getting the advertising revenue. So you guys are smashing it across 3 different ways of using this site, which by that stage is just going up and up and up, right? In terms of popularity and views.
We never anticipated, also never really existed in the history of the world. Back then, you're kind of creating your own rules because it's never been done before. We're optimizing titles, the metadata, the description. Back then, you could, mostly desktop view, so you could click on the subscribe somewhere. You could have like a button that would lead you to subscribe. You could lead you to other videos where you put thumbnails within the video. We were testing all these little fun things that, never been done before. And so it was really exciting, I think, to be part of that digital revolution of just kind of learning ourselves and doing that.
Once people began to monetize their videos on YouTube, the ecosystem exploded with activity. And the biggest gorillas in the jungle were the multi-channel networks, or MCNs. Aggregators who brought together tens of thousands of channels under one roof to allow YouTube to more easily manage their creators. It worked well for YouTube, but not so well for Jonathan, who had to hand over a hefty percentage of his revenue to the MCN and wasn't really sure what he was getting in return.
So we approached this kid in Germany who had about 15 or 16,000 subscribers, had this name Fail Army. I wish I could take credit for the name, but he created the name Fail Army. He said, listen, there's all these channels stealing videos. Why don't you partner with us? We'll buy the rights. We'll give you a royalty for the next 2 years. And let's grow this to be one of the biggest channels on YouTube. And that's exactly what we did. Rarely things go out set a plan, but it became one of the biggest channels on YouTube. We saw other people stealing our videos and we shut that content down. They were creating copies of Fail Army. We were able to shut those down, and Fail Army really rose to being at one point one of the fastest growing channels on YouTube.
So how many subs did you get Fail Army to on YouTube?
We're over like 17 or 18 million on YouTube alone today. Like 80 million when you add up all the other platforms.
Jonathan's success did not go unnoticed. Fail Army had become a huge media brand and one of many under Jonathan's Jukin Media. It wasn't long before the multi-channel network that housed Jukin sent a letter of intent. They wanted to buy Jonathan out. The stage was set for Jonathan's second big swing.
And we were their number one revenue driver. So it made sense.
Right.
Not to get too much in the weeds, but it was the first time I think I had like 20 something employees. The business was going from month to month to all of a sudden have a few $100,000 in the bank account as we started being more successful on YouTube and the licensing business, as both businesses just firing on all cylinders. It was the first time I was able to look at the business because I never thought about forecasts. I never thought about projections. I never thought about what's my real EBITDA. But it was the first time it gave me an opportunity to look at my business. And so the question was, do I sell or do I not sell? And the sales process got a little rough along the way.
So you were kind of working with them then, because I suppose when somebody comes to you with a letter of intent and you're at that stage where it's going fast and everything, you're going to have the conversation. You're not going to say, no, it's fine, I'm busy. You're going to start having that conversation, right?
I think as a business owner, you're always willing to have that conversation. And at the time, it was David versus Goliath. We were David. They were Goliath. They were a company that raised tons of money. They had a huge office. They had 300 employees. I had, nearly 30. And so I thought these guys know what they're doing. And it might be worth it to sell. And I think as a business owner, you should always be having that in mind and somewhat, at least taking those conversations seriously. But the question was, do I sell or do I, build this business? And there were some signs along the way that pushed me to say, hey, maybe I'm onto something here. And as much as like this grew bigger at 30 employees, bigger than I've ever, really anticipated, I thought maybe I can even grow this a little bit bigger.
That's a big decision to take, isn't it? Because you can bank all of that hard work and take the money right now and know that that hasn't been a wasted endeavor. That must have been super exciting to think about that potential outcome.
It was also like giving me a VP job, giving me stock as an employee, and also as a cash and stock deal for the company. And I was, really tempted to do it. 3.5, 4 years into the business, I was working 15, 16-hour days. I was like, should I just take it? And so I decided just to go and had that fork in the road and just go to the fork. And maybe I'm onto something here. And I could be wrong. I probably will be wrong, but I really also wanted the experience, of just like growing the company and setting it up. So it's just going to be like more of a media company. And I remember saying no. They didn't take it too lightly. Unfortunately, got a little litigious and it got ugly. We don't need to go to those details. And so certainly it was a hard decision, but at the same time, it felt like the right decision at the right time.
Amazing. And so your big swing really was to walk away from a deal and to decide to kind of really supersize the business. And that must have been such an exciting time. And you were right. That swing was exactly the right thing to do, which must feel fantastic looking back on it now, knowing that that big call you made, being brave enough to reorganize the company, everything was exactly the right thing to do. Looking back on it, that you must take a lot of pride in that.
I absolutely do. And, this company ended up selling and making, I think, their stockholders a lot of money. And one of the employees I was friends with at that company said, "Hey, John, aren't you mad that you didn't, sell your company back then?" And I said, "Absolutely freaking not. Like, I wouldn't trade this experience in the world." It wasn't the money. It was the experience. It was the fun. It was the people you get to do it with. It was surrounding yourself with a really smart team. To our point earlier about doing it never been done before, there's something really fun and exhilarating about that. And luckily, a lot of the times in our business, not every time, but it was really just going up and to the right. For growing the company from 50 people to 100 people to nearly 300 people and offices in New Delhi, obviously LA, New York, London, to turn this into like a global media company. I wouldn't trade that experience for the world.
And it's amazing because you 10x the company after that. What were the big couple things that you were doing along the line that really helped you 10x the business? What were the drivers of that growth?
I think we were very lucky, just hit on all cylinders. I think having that diversified revenue stream very helped because within those revenue streams became more revenue. So like licensing, for example, we were licensing, just the TV shows, clip shows. Well, then we started licensing to news shows. Then we started licensing the talk shows. It started as user-generated content became more adaptable, more mainstream. People were always worried it's not brand safe. I remember the first time we were pitching to brands and advertisers to use it for UGC for their TV campaigns. They said it's not brand safe. We can't trust. We don't know where it come from. Well, we became that name. We did all the clearance. We became that guys that was safe to use. And if it went through Jukin, you knew it was safe. And so last year we did over 1,000 campaigns of working with brands and agencies.
What I was fascinated by, Jonathan, was how you and your team really identified this explosion in user-generated content, or UGC, i.e. the video that folks were shooting on their own mobile phones and camcorders, and you figured out how huge that was going to be. Because not many people got that a decade ago, right? Because most people in the TV and Hollywood were kind of saying, oh, that stuff doesn't matter. It's low rent. It doesn't make any difference. Whereas I think when we discussed it along the way, you would always talk about how it invoked emotion because it felt really authentic. And this content was much more relatable than a kind of a boring piece of high quality footage.
You're right. We had to educate the market and tell people, no, this content is authentic. It's organic. It evokes this emotion, that you can't remanufacture these very special moments in people's lives. And I think part of being the entrepreneur, and going on a journey is just telling that story over and over and over again.
So, walking away from a deal to sell that wasn't right allowed Jonathan to grow and scale his business to an extraordinary extent, creating new revenue streams and new business lines that simply never existed before. But while deciding to walk away from a sale can absolutely be the right decision in one set of circumstances, selling can equally be the right choice when conditions change. So time for Jonathan's final big swing.
I think if you're an entrepreneur and you're going embarking on this journey, some people say have an exit strategy in mind. And I don't know if it was for you, but like I never really had an exit strategy in mind when I started, at least. Like it was just like prove it's a business and I want something sustainable. I want something that's repeatable, something that's going to feed my family. And if I can have a good time doing it, great. And I can do this for the rest of my life. But I think you realize at some point in that journey that it's really never sustainable. It's never repeatable. Even, like you're always fighting. And I think what I don't love about my business and maybe partly yours is like every year it starts at zero. You have to reset and you have to find more revenue and more money. And, it's not that repeatable. And being media business is hard. And so, having a gun to your head, I think it feels like every day having a startup.
Yeah, I think that people just don't understand the amazing pressure it feels like when you're a founder of a business. And in digital media, things change every day as well.
Totally.
So it's tough to plan for the future.
You're relying on these other platforms too that you have no control over. I think being a founder means you have to be selfish a little bit. You have to, from your family and friends, like this is what I do, this is who I am, and I got to do this. And it's lonely at the top. It's absolutely lonely. And so that also too becomes exhausting. So as we talked about before, when someone's interested in you, and I'm sure you had this too, like you take the meeting seriously. And so there was a handful of times over the years where we took it seriously, where we got some folks coming to us, offer to buy it. And either the time wasn't right for me, it wasn't the right structure, it wasn't the right, maybe the valuation at the time, but mostly it wasn't the right structure or even the right partner on the other end. Especially if you have to be there for X amount of period, you want to be there with someone you like. Well, then what? Because why go into business if you're just going to work for somebody else? Why go in business with yourself? And I think finding that right partner is really the key. And I knew we reached our peak as far as what we could do organically because our numbers they were better, but they were not getting the same growth rates as we were before. And so we said, let's hire a banker and go out and try to buy companies. And that's a great way to scale. And we're looking at a handful of companies. In the meantime, another banker that I happen to know came up to me and said, John, I'm representing this really great old school media company. You should talk to them. And honestly, it was the last thing on my mind to sell because I wanted to just, grow the business. And I think, again, I don't know if it was for you, never, try to sell, be bought. And so I actually wasn't interested in taking the meeting. I definitely was interested in taking an old school media company, which I've had many conversations before. I didn't feel like explaining my business and going through months of diligence and a process.
Have you heard of this website called YouTube? Yeah. Exactly. It's going to be huge.
And I wasn't going to explain it to a YouTube, business and never understand this. And that would take so much time, energy, and focus. So I just want to focus on growing the company. I ended up pulling this meeting off to the end of January. I said, no, I'm not interested, but fine, fuck it. Because it's my, fiduciary to take the meeting for the stockholders and for the company. And so it actually turned out that they called themselves a UGC company too. Except they don't do video. Yeah, they don't do video. They do editorial. They do pictures.
Sure.
And they have websites and they have, physical books and magazines and they have a lot of first-party data. But we don't do video. And we do a lot of video. And we're big on social and we're distributed. We don't have a lot of data. We don't have first-party websites. And so it kind of became this really perfect match.
By the way, that old school media company was none other than Trusted Media Brands, known to you and I as Reader's Digest. They were founded in New York back in 1922. And 99 years later, they wanted to massively expand their online audience by making a bid for Jukin.
We met up then in January and selling of August of 2021. And so, again, it wasn't planned out, but it just felt like the natural course. And I think with everything here, when we talk about the big swings, obviously you got to take risks in the business. Obviously, you have to change things, pivot. There are hard times. But for me, and I think I got very lucky that I always trusted my gut and my instinct. And almost because of that, it kind of came this natural path.
That's so interesting. So you've taken these big decisions that a lot of people would agonize over, but it sounds to me like a lot of the time you felt that they were pretty straightforward decisions because of the experience you'd had leading up to them. How would it have been if you hadn't sold the business?
I think I would have been just as exhausted, but I would have been just as happy as still running the business.
Let's take a moment just to reflect on Jonathan's success. He founded Jukin in 2009 and only 12 years later sells to one of the media's most venerable print brands, Trusted Media, owners of Reader's Digest. The sale price was never disclosed publicly, but I've done a little bit of hunting, and Crunchbase claims that Jukin only ever took $8.6 million of investment, whilst Pitchfork says that they sold the business for $115 million. Now, you have to take those numbers with a pinch of salt, but if they're in the right ballpark, then I couldn't be happier for Jonathan, his team, and the success they so richly deserve. Head to Trusted Media's website, and under the brands they celebrate, Fail Army, Pet Collective, and People Are Awesome are top of the list, and they're all Jukin creations. That should tell you all you need to know. But before we hear which of Jonathan's big swings he thinks was the most impactful, I want to tell you about next week's guest. Remy Blumenfeld's career is rich, enthralling, and brimful of humanity. He's an extraordinarily successful independent TV producer, co-founding and eventually selling not one but two different TV production companies. He joined ITV Studios, where he continued to nurture and export some of the UK's biggest entertainment shows before finding his life's calling in enabling others to flourish and find their success. Remy has been a huge support to me as my coach as I grew my business, and I can't wait to share his wisdom with you guys. Now, back to Jonathan. Which of his three big swings did he feel had the largest impact on his success? Was it number one, setting up Jukin Media in his bedroom as a side hustle to his freelance career? Or number two, turning down the offer to buy his company by a powerful multi-channel network? Or number three, deciding that on finding the right partner, it was time to sell the company after successfully scaling it?
Taking that leap of faith and just doing it. Just start doing the business, and you're not going to have all the answers right away. Just do it and try these, like I said, these micro proof points. You don't need to come out with a big idea. Our business evolved and changed over time. Starting with that idea and taking that leap of faith and just trying it. It's the first step and the most important step.
So fascinating, John. And it's worked out really well for you. So what's next for Jonathan Skogmo after this remarkable story that you've just told us about?
Having the DNA itch of an entrepreneur and having that itch that runs through your veins and through your blood is always going to be there. And so I'm doing a little investing, doing a little advising, but I like operating at the end of the day. And so it's not a matter of if I do it, it's a matter of when I decide to do it.
Well, look, John, whatever you do next will be something I'll be watching, enthusiastically cheering you on from the sidelines as ever. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for explaining how you built Jukin Media into really the sensation of UGC video that it became. And thank you for spending time and for your honesty, sharing all those ups and downs with us today.
Likewise, Sam. Thank you so much.
So that was my conversation with the amazing Jonathan Skogmo, the former founder and CEO of Jukin Media. And my three big take-homes from our chat kind of write themselves, I suppose. Number one is just John's passion for entrepreneurship. Ever since he was running around in shorts back in Chicago, John absolutely loved starting businesses and figuring out how he could operate things in new and clever ways. Imagine being clever enough, aged 10, to figure out that the best way to make money out of your paper round was to get other folks to help you out with it. How brilliant's that? I love that, and it's what powered him into building a 9-figure business was that love and passion for figuring out how to play the game and to win. Passion goes a long, long way, and that love for the game and love of finding out new ways to do things is so important. You have to love it. You have to be up for it. Number two is John's willingness to suffer. Now that sounds like a terrible attribute, but actually it's something that is necessary. If you're going to drive a business, as John did for over a decade, it's really lonely, it's very hard, and other than close family, really the business has to come first every day and night for long, long, long periods of time. And John and I used to bump into each other on the road in conferences all over the world hustling our businesses and trying our best. And so I know just how hard John worked to build Jukin Media into the successful phenomenon that it became. So John's willingness to suffer was remarkable. And number 3 is John's vision and his foresight. You know, user-generated content, people's videos shot on their phones, was the laughingstock of professional publishers and broadcasters. They thought it was nonsense. They thought it was low rent. But do you know what? John saw the opportunity in that. He understood that people loved funny videos, sad videos, poignant videos. And he knew that there was this never-ending source of content out there on the internet. And, you know, the foresight, when John had battled so hard to build a viable business, when he first had somebody offering him the chance to sell his business, when he had less than 30 employees, to take the decision in the end to walk away from that offer. Oh my God, that must have taken such guts, because not many people would have told him to keep going. Most people had said, take the money, John, and run. But John knew that Jukin had such a great future ahead of it. And then he was right. He was proved absolutely right. He grew that business 10 times the size that it was when he first had a sale, before he eventually sold the company with his amazing team. And that vision to understand that UGC was going to be huge, and the foresight that if he could just keep going, he would make the company into a huge success, are remarkable. I loved catching up with John and going through his story all over again. And next time you're on the subway or looking at a video and you see some hilarious bit of home footage, think of John, because he's the guy that took that from PO boxes and envelopes stuffed with VHS tapes to being one of the main sources of joy and hilarity online for the world. Thank you so much, John, for sharing your story, and thanks everybody for listening to the Big Swing podcast. The Big Swing podcast is produced in association with the amazing Spirit Studios. Our executive producer is Fred Casella. Our sound designer is Will Horrocks. And The Big Swing was created by me, Sam Barcroft.